Hello, Jeff Zwarenk here, and welcome back to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific ideas and how they relate to the truth of Christianity. Today I'm joined by Fazale Rana, and we're going to ask the question, does the old earth creation view make God deceptive? Fuzz, nice to have you back on the show today.
Jeff, thank you.
So kind of give us just a little bit of background of what is the old earth view, what are kind of the central points of it, and what are the important features of it?
Yeah, well, as the name implies, old earth creationism is a position where we would argue that the earth is indeed 4.5 billion years old, the universe is 13.7 billion years in age. And so the old earth creationist position accepts the antiquity of the earth and the universe, but it would argue that the history of life on earth is best explained through the direct personal involvement of a creator. So it is a creationist position where we would argue that God is intervening, again, in a direct personal way to bring about his creative purposes throughout Earth's history. So
it sounds like there's the time scales and the history of what happened. Mm-hmm. The old earth creation view would accept that, but that it's not just everything kind of played out, that God's intervening and making things happen. Now, is it that God is intervening to make everything happen? Is it all fiat? Is it a combination of fiat and process, all process?
Well, it probably depends on who you ask as an old earth creationist, but the range of views would be God is intervening periodically to bring about creative purposes, and then small-scale evolutionary changes take place beyond that point. Others would argue that God is intervening in a direct personal way quite extensively throughout life's history on Earth. Mm-hmm. So there's a range of views, but the key point is that old Earth creationists are skeptical about the capacity of evolutionary mechanisms to fully account for the origin and the history and the design of life.
So kind of, I recognize that there's a range of views that an old earth creationist might take. How would you narrow down, what is RTB's more specific position, if you will?
I think we would basically argue that God is intervening quite frequently to bring about his creative purposes, but we would allow for microevolutionary changes and for speciation to take place. But we would see God intervening quite frequently throughout Earth's history.
So that would imply that there's some capacity of life to adapt to environments, but dogs aren't going to become cats. There's some limit to how far that adaptation will work.
Exactly.
So now you've written a blog fairly recently arguing or asking this question, does this view make God deceptive? What's the basis? Why are you claiming that this might make God deceptive?
Well, I'm trying to defend the view that it doesn't make God deceptive.
I figured as much.
Yeah, but there is a number of people who are critics of our perspective who argue that there's this overwhelming evidence that we see for biological evolution, and then to insist that that evidence is reflecting God's direct involvement makes God deceptive. In other words, we're claiming that it looks like it's designed we're claiming that it's designed even though it looks like it has evolved.
So this seems to have parallels to the old earth, young earth debate, where in some sense, as an old earth creationist, you could make a charge against the young earth creationist that if the earth is really only 6,000 to 10,000 years old, universe is the same scale, the idea that it looks so pervasively like the earth is billions of years old as the universe, that somehow that makes God deceptive. Is that kind of a parallel of what's going on here?
It is, exactly. And this is called the appearance of age argument, mm-hmm. and it traces back to a biologist and a preacher named Philip Goss, who in the 1800s wrote a book called Omphalos, mm-hmm. where he argues that the earth is indeed 6,000 years old, but God created it to appear as if it was ancient. And so this idea still makes its way into some young earth arguments where it's called an appearance of age. Now the rejoinder to that argument is theological, in that if that's the case, if the universe measures to be old, but that it's actually young, then that makes God deceptive, and that seems to be contrary to his character.
Okay, so that in that sense, if the universe, or at least life here on Earth, looks like it's evolved, and we're arguing that it's designed, or that Scripture says it's designed, mm-hmm. then are we not claiming God is deceptive? So how would you respond to that claim?
Right, and again, it's all predicated on the claim that when we look at biological systems, they look indeed as if they have evolved. And our point, or our rejoinder to that is, actually it's the opposite, that when we look at biological systems, our first reaction is that these systems look like they're designed. So you even have people like Richard Dawkins, who said in a famous statement that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. And so to look at biology and to say it looks like it's designed is not making God deceptive, but it's actually following the evidence where it leads. Or if you look at how biologists describe biological systems, they always are using design language. They can't escape that design language. And in fact, there was a philosopher of biology who coined a term called teleonomy, which means things look like they are designed even though they really aren't, and that allows us to use design language without meaning that it's actually designed. And that concept is in contradistinction to teleology, which means that something is designed because it truly is designed by the work of a mind. So my point would be our first intuition when we look at biological systems is that they're designed, and then we're imposing an evolutionary explanation upon them.
You know, that's kind of fascinating because it does two things in my understanding of what you're saying. Is that one, it draws a distinction between the old Earth, young Earth, how old is the Earth, and this, because there's no real sense where we look at the Earth and it looks young. It seems like there's all these evidence that points to it being old, whereas when we're looking at the biological systems, the idea that it looks designed is not a particularly ludicrous idea. You've got prominent scientists, skeptic, atheist, Christian, all alike saying, yeah, it looks designed. And so it seems like there's that very distinct, that draws a pretty sharp distinction between the two. But then you're also going along and saying that it's not like everything looks like it's evolution, that it actually provides a rejoinder to the idea that God is deceptive because it does look like things are designed.
Yeah, and it's very interesting too, because what people will claim to be the best evidence for evolution, which are the shared biological features that we see among organisms, could be understood from a design framework as well, where you would look at those shared features as reflecting common design, not an evolutionary history or common descent. And in fact, in the history of thought in biology, there was a prominent scientist by the name of Sir Richard Owen who proposed that very interpretation prior to Darwin, that these shared features reflect shared design. So again, there's a history in biology where, you know, again, you can't escape the appearance of design. So it's not making God deceptive, but it's really following the evidence where it seems to logically and naturally point.
So in some sense, we've got two competing models for how we explain why things look designed. One is this naturalistic evolutionary view, and one is a more creationist, or there is actual design there, and that there's repetition or reusing the design in multiple features. So it's almost like there's two competing scientific ways of explaining this design that is so readily apparent to so many people.
Yeah, and I think this is the interesting thing about science, is sometimes two very different models can readily account for the same set of data, and I think this is what we actually see here. And so again, it's a false charge to assert that old Earth creationism is making God deceptive. I don't think that's the case whatsoever. It's a very different type of argument than what you see as an appearance of age argument made by some young Earth creationists.
Well, thank you very much, Faz. I appreciate your comments. You know, the idea of God being deceptive really is that would be a very detrimental discovery to come across. But yet when we look at the creation, we see evidence for great antiquity, and we see evidence for design scattered throughout the biological realm. It really does point to a creator who's fashioned this universe for life, who's intervened to make life happen, but also uses process to develop and advance that life in various ways. You know, I would encourage you to go to reasons.org and check out Fuzz's blog on this. It's called Does Old Earth Creationism Make God Deceptive? And you will see just some of this powerful evidence for design and how you can use it to go out and articulate a powerful case that there's a God who created all of us so that we can know him.